Hello, everybody. This is Carrie Getz, and welcome back to another edition of our podcast series. And this series now accompanies a book that was just released. So we hope you'll check out the book. And if you have the book, welcome to the podcast series. Today, we are interviewing Mara Fowler, who's been in this industry for a very long time, a good friend of mine. She is in sales and she is a master at networking. So, Mara, why don't you introduce yourself to folks and then we'll start yakking about what you do?
Sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you, Carrie. I've been a follower of yours for quite some time. So it's been exciting to see your journey recently. And the book was a big wow for me. So thank you for putting that out there. It's really easy for me to hand that off to folks that I come across that are new in the industry. But thank you for having me today. Looking
You're
forward to
welcome.
having this conversation with you.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved. I'm sure you fell in this industry like everybody else did, but tell us kind of what your journey was like.
Yeah. So when I was in school, my aspirations, first thought I was going to be a bull rider, and that my teacher was like, pick again. That's not an option. So I picked journalism, and I was good at writing. I was good at communication, and that's what I went to school for. And I was actually a waitress in Hickory, and one of my tables was Corning, who was Corning Cable Systems at the time was headquartered in Hickory, and they offered me a job in customer service and offered to help with my tuition. And I just thought it would be kind of a short stint. Customer service didn't really appeal to me, but I got in there and I quickly learned that there was a big pathway for myself in the industry. And I called on like MCI WorldCom, Williams Communications. This was during 99 to 2001, the big telecom bubble. And we were just pumping out orders and cable orders as fast as we could. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the technology. And then I started meeting other salespeople. I was in customer service and I was like, oh, I kind of like this, and I'm not your type A personality. I never thought, the only dealings I had with sales at that age in my life was, buying a car or, retail sales. I just didn't really see the pathway for me long term. But then I started to realize, hey, this is something I really would like to do. So I stayed with Corning for about 12 years. I was in customer service, then moved to inside sales, business development. And that kind of took me on a pathway into outside sales, now global sales. So that's kind of been my pathway so far.
And that's kind of a normal progression, I think, for people that are starting out. And I know there's a lot of people that are listening that are like, how the hell do you even start in this industry? Like, where do you go? What's your jumping in point for the industry? And I think a lot of people start in that customer service area. I think it's a good way to start and get some of that knowledge. The tricky part is figuring out who all the vendors are and who all are in the industry. So I know that you said that you kind of got found in a restaurant, which,
Yeah.
from bull riding to that is kind of a fun story in and of itself. But uh on your first day on the job when you started out, clearly you knew nothing about the industry. So talk
Right.
about some of the tools, some of the stuff that was helpful for you figuring out, what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about.
Yeah. So early on, it was funny. I kind of saw people in the organization and the industry that I knew I wanted to aspire to. And so I just would reach out to them, whether that was internally at the company I was at or externally. I used LinkedIn a lot. And so I would just reach out and say, hey, I'm really interested in just knowing a little bit more about your pathway and how you got here. And I was doing that a lot. And I was asking people for help. In fact, I was asking like prospects and customers for help. So rather than just calling and saying, hey, I want to sell you something, like my first co-location, I think it was like P10 at the time, now Flexential, but I just called and said, hey, I don't know a lot about co-location data centers. Can you teach me? And they set up a tour in Charlotte. I went into one of their buildings, and the data center manager, it wasn't a sales call. It was an education process. So I just spent a lot of time learning and just being a sponge. And one bit of advice that I got was if you do reach out to a mentor or somebody in the industry for advice, make sure you take it and you follow up on it and you do it. And I just kept doing that over and over. Now, I did have disappointment. I applied for the first time I ever applied for an inside sales position. I didn't have an engineering background and they were looking for engineers. So, what did I do? I learned as much as I could. I spent time with project services. I learned how to splice cable. I learned how to do everything that an engineer could do without the engineering degree. And I went back and then I applied again and I got the job. So, you just kind of have to be a chameleon, but you can't be intimidated by leaders in the industry now. And I think that's really what my focus is now is new people that are coming in, especially women in the industry. I want to make sure that it's easier for them than it was for me.
Right.
I had to seek out that help. And, it's funny, you and I both have had a couple of events and groups where we have these young women who are in their, early 20s, early 30s, and they're sliding right in and kind of accomplishing what it took us years to accomplish. And I'm okay with that. I don't I don't think that we have to punish them and say, hey, you know what, I had to earn my stripes, so you're going to have to earn yours too and do it on your own. We now have a tribe of women who help each other, right? So that we can speed up that process and say, hey, you don't have to. We were the trailblazers. We carved out a lot of this work. We know a lot of people. Please come to these events. I'll walk in with you, and just make them feel more welcome. But that would be my first bit of advice is just, you kind of have to be fearless. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I had a call last week with a young woman who's trying to get I think I even tagged you in the post, but she's trying to get a young professionals group started up in Oregon. And she's like, I'm intimidated you're like a master on social media and LinkedIn. I'm afraid to like post and make mistakes. I said, girl, I've made mistakes. I've posted stuff. I've tagged the wrong companies. I've made mistakes when I reach out to people. You really have to be fearless and use the tools that you have. In fact, I met one of the executives at LinkedIn and I told them when I first got on LinkedIn, I was like, wow, this is an easy way to meet people. So I was sending out requests to anybody and everybody that was a prospect, and they blocked me. They blocked me and shut down my account because I'd sent so many requests.
Whoops.
I think it was for like 60 days. I had no access to LinkedIn.
Oh no,
So
that's tough.
so I had to write a letter to them and be like, listen, I'm in inside sales. This is what I'm using. We didn't have a lot of the tools now to get these lists and contacts. So they gave me my access back. And, fast forward now, I have to filter through my LinkedIn request. And most of the time I accept them, right? I'm just kind of open. Even if you're a competitor, there are so many shifts in this industry. You have to really get to know everybody, get to know your competitors on a personal level. We do that. We have events and I might be sitting at the dinner table with one of my competitors, but we get to know each other on a personal level because fast forward 2 months, one of us could lose a job. One of us might need something on a personal level and we want to be there to support each other. So,
Well, and here's the other thing too that you touched on a couple things that are really important. I think if we start with the mentorship one, once you find a mentor, that relationship is never going to work if you're the mentee and you don't put in the time. You can't expect a
absolutely.
mentor to read your mind. So touch maybe a little bit on the most successful mentorship relationship that you've had.
Yeah. So my most successful mentorship probably started out a little rocky. It was an executive at Corning, and she had kind of earned her stripes, and she was at a more of a senior level. And there were a few things I was just doing wrong, and she kind of called me out and said, "All right, if you want to come to me for advice, here's a few things you have to be willing to talk about it all." Right. So she did. We kind of went through from start to finish all the things, the weaknesses and things that I had, and started there. And I had to be really open and with her and transparent about my vulnerabilities, about those weaknesses. And she saw some things. So I was offended at first. I went home that day from that first meeting and I was offended. And I think I even went to bed like in tears thinking, she doesn't really think that much of me. And I'm like, am I really even cut out for this business? And this is the track that I need to take. But I really just started to say to myself, hey, she took the time with me and she's given me what constructive criticism, act on it. So I did. I just chin up. I just took it. And then I went back to her and said, hey, these are the things that I'm working on. These are the things that we've talked about. And through that whole process, fast forward, this has been a 15-year relationship. I had a personal experience over the past couple of years where my father passed away and she stepped up and helped pay for my dad's funeral. We had some funds that were locked up and she paid for so I fast forward, I thought at one time in my life, this woman didn't like me and she was out and she just wasn't going to advocate for me. And I really just stuck with it. I listened to her. I let her coach me. I let her guide me. And and this wasn't a formal mentorship. I'm kind of more of an advocate of informal mentorship. But I went to her with my goals, what I wanted to achieve and what I wanted to, accomplish. And I didn't wait for her to tell me, I told her what my goals were and then I just kind of let her coach me on how to achieve them and guide me. But you can't go in there and just quiet and just not have any idea. You just have to say, you know what, I don't have it all figured out, but kind of like, here's the baseline for the things that I want to achieve. And do your homework, right? Be ready to roll up your sleeves and do the work. So,
Yeah, I totally stole this phrase from Terry Bradshaw. So credits to Terry Bradshaw. But there's a lot to be said for mirror economics, where you really look in the mirror and you try to separate yourself from that. And I would say that probably, and you can weigh in on this better than me because I'm not a salesperson, but being able to take that criticism and being able to take no is hard, especially for women. I mean, we're just hard on our sleeve kind of people. And so talk a little bit about how some of that mentorship and those mirror economics and kind of working through that helped you on the sales side, and maybe how that, somebody starting out that's in that criticism cycle or that self-improvement cycle,
yeah,
whatever you want to call it, and then maybe some resources or some things that could help women starting there too, or
I love
anybody really.
Yeah, I love this topic. Our friend Wendy Stewart at DataBank does a phenomenal job with her messaging around the imposter syndrome. And when I first heard the messaging, I was like, that's not me. I kind of feel like I'm strong and confident and all these things. But listening to other women in the industry, I do feel like we as women, and especially coming up in this industry, we've had to be kind of strong, right? We have to appear fearless. We have to appear strong. We can't be vulnerable. I think one of the first things I learned was don't cry in front of men, don't cry in the boardroom, hold back your emotions. And so that was kind of ingrained in us, right? So over time, I've learned that people are human, and especially in the sales process, that human aspect of that is so important for our customers because they don't want to feel like you're selling to them ever. I don't know one customer that's bought from me who just loves being sold to. And like they want to go through a journey with you, and there has to be that human aspect to it. And there has to be some emotions tied to this. And if you're vulnerable and open with your emotions, I think that your customers are going to be more receptive, more open with you, and kind of take on that personal touch to the relationship, keeping it still professional. You can still keep it business-like and still have a very high level of respect, but have that personal touch. So back to that imposter syndrome, I think for a lot of us, we hide behind, I think we learn and we kind of teach ourselves to kind of cover up and mask any of those insecurities, and we get so good at it that we don't realize how we're doing that. How are we coping with it? Is it high? You have to be a high achiever. You don't ever like to make mistakes. What does it look like? And there's a couple of different areas or different ways that you mask that imposter syndrome. Everybody's different, but most of the people that I talk to, men and women alike, have some touch of that somewhere in their life, whether or not they're dealing with it or they have dealt with it. It's there and it's okay. So um, that's my advice: is to just try to just stay true to yourself and authentic, right? And just be genuine, be yourself. You don't have to be anything other than who you really are when you go through the sales process with your customers.
Well, like I said, I'm not a salesperson, but I've been on the customer side, right? I have been the customer and I've had multi-million dollar budgets. And I can absolutely tell you that the salespeople that called on me, the ones that were personable, that cared to have that relationship, anybody can sell you a part. And that's not really where you want to be, especially in this industry, because when it all goes down and, stuff starts hitting the air conditioning, you want to make sure that you can call somebody that's going to understand. And those people that take the time to build up that business relationship are going to work through you. And then when hiccups happen, like supply chain right now is a great one, right? When all that happens, it's much easier to work through that with your customer or with your vendor. In my case, if you have that relationship and you can talk through those problems, because there are always going to be problems. There's no way you can get around that. And I think too that we talk about fear and imposter syndrome, and I think those two really go hand in hand. This is a very risk averse industry, and people are scared to fail, especially because that kind of goes from the top down, right? If there's downtime, if there's an outage, it reflects on everybody across the board. But we all know there's going to be downtimes and there's going to be outages, and people will survive. Like unless it's life changing, people get over it. They might get mad for a little while, and there's some implications. But I do think having those relationships helps work through those hurdles and those hills that happen.
Absolutely. I was just going to say the sales process has changed. The coming out of the pandemic and all the supply chain disruptions, it's changed. And so just what you said, for customers who it was highly about price and product quality, those things are still important, right? But service started getting really up there. It started ranking even higher, and the companies that failed during the supply chain issues but recovered quickly, those are the ones that have earned more credibility in the market. And so now our customers aren't, they're going to ask you about price, they're going to ask you about product quality and so forth, but they want to know about service, they want to know about delivery, they want to know about communication, they want to know who's going to pick up the phone when they need they call, and
Escalation.
escalation. They just want to know there's somebody they can rely on and call on that's going to go to battle for them and advocate for them without them having to beg for you to do it. They just want to know, hey, Mara's my salesperson and she's going to go to war for me, and she's going to do her best. And if they don't deliver, I know she did her best at the end of the day. That's what they want now. And I think it's becoming more and more important to get us through because supply chain issues aren't over. We're still battling long lead times with different product categories. But that's why I would say it's so important that you make sure that service team and support team, you can really rely on them to help you get out of a crunch if things go sideways.
Sure. So let's talk about, since we're talking a little bit about sales and some of the sales hurdles, let's talk about cold calling and how you get new customers. Give
Yeah.
give some folks that are kind of jumping into those positions some thoughts and ideas, because that's something you're really good at.
So my favorite, and it's hard when you have limited T&E, travel and expense budgets and things like that, but my success is higher when I face to face, whether I meet somebody at an event or a happy hour or whatever, those face to face interactions usually get me to a better place with prospects, but that's not always the case. You can't always meet these folks face to face. Again, when you do reach out, so this is what I like to do on LinkedIn. If I do connect with somebody on LinkedIn, it's very hard, like especially when there's a project and there's a hot opportunity that you're trying to track down and you make a connection. It's really hard to kind of like pull back and not just start talking to them about the opportunity and selling to them, right? Because now you've got this connection, and it could be you've got an email and you've got their phone number, and however it is that you've come across their information, you really have to stop yourself from engaging them on the sales process. Early on in that relationship, it's really important that they feel like you genuinely want to connect with them. And so, whether it's LinkedIn or email or a phone call and leaving a voicemail, it's a genuine connect. And you really have to be sincere about this. You need to get to know this person on a professional level. You need to know what their needs are. You need to understand their business. I loved, especially if I get a referral for somebody, I'll just be like, hey, Carrie asked me to reach out to you, thought we'd be a good connection. I really just like to spend some time with you and get to know you better, understand your business better. Lead with that. Never lead with, hey, I'm your account rep and I'm chasing down this opportunity and I'd like to talk to you about it. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to they're not going to respond to you. So get to know them, build a relationship. And then through those conversations, yes, absolutely. Share what you do, share what your value is to them, because that's also part of my sales process is I don't like to show up and throw up, right? I don't like to just, we know our sales pitches, right?
Show up
We
and throw
come
up.
on
That's
in.
great, actually.
Yeah, we know what they are because when you go through your sales training, I guarantee anybody that's listening to this, you've been through sales training and they send you to a room, they tell you they work in teams and they're like, all right, we're going to work on your 2-minute elevator pitch and you get really good at it. Don't ever use it. Just don't use it. Not right out of the box. But you can rely on it in your conversations as you're talking to these individuals when they kind of ask you what you do. Just hit the highlights, right? I remember doing cold calling, and I, I I can't remember exactly who it was. This was back in Corning in my early days, and I called and called and called and called, and finally, and I left voicemails, and this went on for like 3 or 4 months. And then one day, the guy answered the phone, and when he answered the phone, I couldn't believe he answered the phone. And I told him my elevator pitch and he didn't say anything back. And then I paused and I was like, are you still there? And he was like, yeah, I was just kind of letting you breathe. And I was like, oh, but I remembered that. And so now when I'm talking to sales, when I'm talking to my customers and going through this sales process, whether it's in person or on the phone, I take a lot of pauses. I ask a lot of questions, especially early on in these relationships. If you haven't gotten the book, there's an old book I always pass out. It's Spin Selling. It's just those basic principles. And the majority of that is getting to know your customer, getting to know the opportunity and their needs. And you can't do that by talking. So if you find yourself in a sales meeting and a customer meeting and you've done a lot of talking, try to change that back to just asking more questions. And we may think that as a salesperson, we're supposed to show up and just know it all and just talk and show them and tell them everything we're good at. But that doesn't really get you far into the sales process. You can push your customer away. So you just need to use that opportunity to really ask a lot of questions. Try to get your customer to do most of the talking. In fact, when you get to the point when you're through the questions, through the understanding their needs and pains points that you're trying to help solve, when you finally get to the place where you have more of a custom way of solving their problems, the customer kind of goes through that with you and you start sharing the products and technology and they've already started to open up with you. So then they start they're buying or wanting to buy and wanting more information, and they kind of take control of that whole process for you, and you don't have to do it. You don't have to sell them on it. I use the words, you kind of take your customer on this journey and they come to a knowing with you, because you should never really know what your customer wants to when you first meet them. They come to a knowing with you, and together you kind of figure this out. So,
Well, that's true. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? That old saying, you have 2 ears and one mouth for a reason, is pretty applicable. And I think, too, that the more you speak with a customer, the more it identifies new opportunities. And the more, from a customer perspective, it allows you to find and tap into resources that you weren't available. So a lot of times that business relationship, that partner relationship identifies new things that'll be useful to you that you might not have even known about. And I think today that's so critical because there's no company out there that says, here's more, please do less. It's the other way around, right? So everybody's looking for an easy button. Everybody's trying to figure out how to make things work and go. And to your point about networking with competitors, I mean, sometimes your worst competitor might have the one product that makes you the hero in your customer's eyes. And I think that we have to really, especially as women in the industry, there's so many women that still think that we have to compete with each other. And I think that is totally the wrong way. I think there's so many times that we can pool our resources, and really just what we can do together is amazing.
Absolutely. And to that point, when you're working with a customer and you're know that their competition is kind of in the ring, and like you said, there might be a place for you to have to say no to a customer, or they tell you, hey, somebody else has shorter lead times. We had to go through that process with some customers over the last couple of years. We were like, you know what, we're going to have to say our competitors have, obviously they're prepared to serve you better right now, but after some time, the customers always came back. They will eventually come back, right? They just want to, that I was just going to say, that's probably one of the hardest lessons I learned in sales. Because if you started in customer service, or if you're customer service oriented, you have this mantra of you don't want to say no. And I hated saying no. And I always loved giving my customers some type of solution. Well, when you get into sales, you kind of realize, hey, you can't say yes to everything. You have to say no to sometimes, because now my customers, these are long term, these are customers that I keep doing business with, right? I've had a couple of different positions with manufacturers. I've worked in distribution, and I've served these same customers in different capacities. And what you don't want to do is say yes to something, not be able to deliver, and then 5 years from now, you're in front of that customer again. They're going to remember that
Yeah.
you said yes to something and your company was not able to deliver on that. So say no if you have to. Take back, and maybe your company has things that you need to work on to be able to deliver on the on to this customer, and then you'll have another opportunity later on down the road. It may not be a year, it might be 5 years, right? So, but learning to say no is always hard.
So what was the worst experience that you thought you were not going to get over that you absolutely got over anyway?
That's a good question. So I've had a hyperscaler that I've had a really good relationship with, and I was working for a company. I was really excited about a program and an opportunity solution set that we had to position with them, and the hyperscaler basically cut me a blanket purchase order the first day that they found out that I had this opportunity to sell this to them. They cut me a blanket PO, and over the next 6 months, we failed miserably on
Oops.
delivery. On It was so upsetting. But like I said, I'm a warrior. I went to battle for this customer, and but you're only one person, right? So over the next 6 months, things went sideways, and I thought I had just really messed up this relationship, right? So at the end of it, I went back to my team that I was working with, and I just said, hey, you know, obviously this didn't work out, and I think at this point, unfortunately, we need to pull the plug on this, and you need to go back to your other um, provider. And we kind of cleaned up things and shipped everything that they had on order so far, and they ended up going back to their other provider. And I left going out of that thinking they're never going to want to do business with me again. Now, fast forward, doing business with them. I'm still doing business with them. And I just actually asked the question. I was like, why didn't that mess things up for me? And one of the decision makers said, you know what, Mara, I'm always looking for a reason to do business with you. Your product, you're not the products, you're not you are the companies you represent, but I'm buying from you as a person. I'm not buying from the company. you're not even with that company anymore. You're with another company. So it was just nice to hear. And that's why I think it goes back to that whole relationship aspect. If you're just selling the company and you're not selling yourself and your brand, that's what they become familiar with. They become familiar with who you are as a person, and they'll follow you. And if you do a good, if you may not even deliver on the products and the quality issues and all that, but if you really do a good job and you're genuine, these customers will try to find a reason to keep doing business with you. And that's what my success story was from that. And obviously, I don't go into every opportunity thinking, oh, if things just go sideways, they'll always want to buy from me. That's not always the case, but it does help things when they just know that they can trust you as an advisor and you're going to be honest with them throughout the process.
Yeah, and I think that's important too for other reasons that you didn't touch on, and that is from the end user perspective, we talk. And we know which companies provide good service. We know what salespeople will take care of you because nobody has the extra time to do all that. You want somebody that's really going to be your advocate. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's the same thing with the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, somebody that'll stick your name out when you're in the room. And I think that holds over to sales too. I mean, there's a lot of people that I've done business with in the past that I would 100% recommend to other people. There's also people that I've done business in the past that I would absolutely not recommend to people. And it's funny on one bid, I got a call because somebody used us as a reference, and just because we happen to be in the same industry, and they called to see how it went, and the answer was we kicked them out. But they didn't think anybody was really going to call that reference. They were just going to put it down because it looked good on paper. So, but I think that's really true. End users talk, and I think people that do a great job get amplified, and that's so important, especially in an industry where there's no shortage of people and products and things. So we're bumping close to our time, but I will ask you if you wanted to give some parting words for somebody starting out brand new that's never been in the industry, or somebody that's coming from sales from another industry into this industry. What would your advice be to hit the ground running? What would you say?
So I would say leverage who you know, leverage your network, and don't just be fearless. Like I said, I just talked to somebody the other day that they're kind of restricted on travel and they don't get to go to a lot of events. That's okay, but use your network, stay connected and plugged in, and don't be afraid to reach out. Reach out to people. Reach out to me. Reach out to Carrie, especially if you're a woman in this industry. If you do feel like we have it all together and oh, Mara's got 10,000 followers and we don't have it all together. Every day is a battle. Every day we get up, every day is a battle. So look at us as your peers, right? Don't look at us as the industry experts. Don't be intimidated by our journey or what we've accomplished. Come in and own your own brand, own yourself, and just kind of create your own pathway and network, stay networked, connected. Do find a mentor. It doesn't have to be formal. Just find somebody that you can reach out to. And if you need somebody local to you and you're kind of unsure of how to get into the market, reach out to myself, reach out to Carrie. We have a tribe of women across the country, and we do this every day. We find somebody new in the market, we get them connected and paired up, and that would be my advice: is just to get plugged in to those people that are trailblazers and have been in the industry a while.
And I would say too that I think just trying to figure out the companies in the industry. And so this question, somebody asked me this actually 2 days ago. How do you even figure out who the suppliers are? And my suggestion was go to some of the industry events and look at the sponsors on their page.
Yep.
Look who the people are that have some of the products and stuff for the industry. And then as you start searching on those, you can search for competitors of those. You can search, there's lots of ways you can kind of back into that. But I think doing your research and understanding how to do research is probably as critical as having the skills to do anything else
Absolutely.
in your job.
Absolutely. And a shameless plug for your book is if you are getting into the mission critical industry, digital infrastructure, your book uh, what it does is everything that I could try to journal and accomplish in a call or to chart out what I've learned over the years. This book is a great way to get acclimated and at least started into how the data center industry is broken out, and then go from there. And then once you go through the book and you like highlight some areas where you need more information, then take that as your framework to kind of set on a path to kind of figure out the rest. But yeah, get the book, read the book.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the intent. I wanted to write something that was under 200 pages so it could be digested in a weekend, but give people enough background and information so when you go on a job interview or it is your first day at work, you don't feel like you're spending the first 30 days trying to figure out the industry before you can get to your job. So I hope it does that, and I hope it hits the mark. And if it doesn't, well, it's a cheap book. So there you
There you
go. Anyway, Mara, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I think this has been spectacular. I will put Mara's contact information in the podcast information. She is Mara Fowler on LinkedIn. Of course, you guys know where to get me. And thank you so much for listening. Thanks for your time, Mara.
Thank you, Carrie. It's been great.
And
Thank you.
thanks. We look forward to you guys listening on another edition of the podcast. Have a great day.